am Regine Jessica Abuel, your host for this podcast. For today's episode, we are joined by our amazing and inspirational guest who fights for justice, compensation, representation, and the protection of migrant workers' rights in the region. She is a legal practitioner in Malaysia, and is the current chairperson of Migrant Forum in Asia, a regional network with membership in 18 countries from Middle East and Asia, advocating for the protection of migrant workers. She is also the director of Our Journey, an NGO based in Malaysia, which is an NGO platform for experts on migrant issues to advocate for government and private stakeholders to develop a supportive migration system for non-citizens incorporated with international standards and norms. She also serves in many national, regional, and international groups, coalitions, and networks to advocate for the protection and rights of migrants, domestic workers, refugees, asylum seekers, stateless persons, trafficked persons, and foreign spouses, as well as foreign nationals on death row. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us welcome our guest for tonight, Miss Sumitha Shantini Krishna. Yay!
Thank you.
Hello,
Thank you for having me.
Sumitha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
It's our pleasure and an honor to have you with us tonight, Sumitha. Thank you so much for your time. How's Malaysia so far? How are
Malaysia
you there?
so far is okay. I'm fine. Thank you.
That's good. And I hope the weather is also well, because here
Yes.
in the Philippines, it's getting colder already since Christmas season is coming up. Yeah. So I guess would like to start off by asking you, Sumitha, how did you get into working with migrant workers?
It's an interesting journey.
Mm-hmm.
During my employment at the Bar Council of Malaysia from 2007 to 2018, I was the officer in charge of the Bar Council's Migrants, Refugees, and Immigration Affairs Committee. So prior to that, I had zero knowledge of migrant rights, zero knowledge about anything about migrants. And I must admit that I was very much like many Malaysians, xenophobic about migrants, and did not want to actually do anything about migrant rights. But I was literally forced into this work by my employer at that time to be in charge of this committee, and but I found the journey very enlightening, and I took almost 2 years to educate myself by attending events, seminars, reading on migrant rights. And in conclusion, I found that migrants are just like you and I, who want to provide for themselves and for their family. And when I look around myself, even today, there are many, many migrants who make a difference for themselves and also for us. And they're so vital to our nation building. So that was one of my journeys that changed my perception of migrant workers. And then I became an advocate for them. And I'm also very into empowering the migrant workers to speak for themselves as well.
Wow, that's such an inspirational story. I mean, of course, we wouldn't leave it just on chance. I mean, I'd still like to believe that everything happened for a reason, and you were there to lead you in that path where you are now. So that's a very interesting story. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, what do you think are given the situation from the time that you were assigned as a head for migrants when you started working? I mean, when you started working with migrants, can you tell us what are the challenges faced by migrant workers? Maybe you can relate it to your country and also probably the region as well. And what kind of work does your organization do with migrant workers?
Right. The challenges are numerous. So we have a lot of labor violations, like wage theft in the form of non-payment of wages or overtime, unlawful deductions. We see a lot of those. Long working hours beyond the specified working hours, We also see a lot of migrant workers not getting proper accommodation, which is not in accordance with the law. A holding of passport and travel documents, a restriction of movement. This is the reason for that. Inability to access medical, either because of distance or because it's too costly. And of course, we see a lot of migrants going through extortion and harassment, not only by enforcement, but also by public. Then, of course, the fear of arrest and detention. So these are some of the many, many challenges that migrant workers face. In terms of my work with the migrants, I started our journey in 2017, and I also resumed active practice as a lawyer, primarily to provide legal representation for migrants and refugees in labor, criminal, and immigration matters. I provide them
Mm.
pro bono. I do not charge the clients because when I was working with the Bar Council, finding a lawyer to advocate, or rather to fight their case, was really, really difficult. And so I wanted to fill that gap, and that is how I became taking up cases myself. In extension of the pandemic, because the pandemic, I think, gave us a lot of challenges, and one of the challenges we found was access to food for migrants, because the
Mhm.
country was closed down, and the government had a lot of food aid, but then limited it to nationals, so Malaysians only. So we began a humanitarian aid program called Makan for Migrants, which translates to food for migrant. And we
Mm.
provided food for thousands of migrants during the pandemic. And we then extended the program to cover immunization for children, milk and diapers for children. And also now we are doing vaccination for migrants, the COVID vaccination for migrants as well. So these are some of the work that I do. Of course, we do a lot of advocacy with the government in the region as well. And additionally, we to enhance outreach to the migrants, we actually launched a free app called the Just Good Work Malaysia. This was done with Ethical Trading Initiative
Just
58 and
good.
Very
Sorry, what's the program called
Just.
again?
The app is called Just Good Work Malaysia.
Just Good Work Malaysia. It's an
Yes,
app. It's an app
yes,
that you develop.
yes. So it comes in 7 languages, and it provides independent information to job seekers coming to Malaysia and workers already in Malaysia about work and life in Malaysia. So it gives a lot of
Mm.
information. And the app also has a inbuilt confidential grievance reporting mechanism. So migrant workers can report their grievance anonymously to us, and then we will assist them to resolve the issue. So that's what the app does.
Wow. I mean, I'm speechless. I admire your work. I mean, not just with how you started with, but how you're trying to also develop certain things right now that are relevant and also easier, I guess, for people, especially for migrants, to access. The one that you mentioned a while ago about the app, Just Good Work Malaysia, is, I think it's a very effective tool. I mean, especially for migrant workers to report their employers, or if they feel that their rights as employees are violated. And it's kind of like it creates a safe space. It creates a safe space for migrant workers, and not
Yeah, it
just
was
them but also
created.
their families.
Yeah, it was created with inputs from the migrants. So the app is free.
Mm.
It is minimal download, and you do not need data to browse the app. You need just
Oh,
data to
really?
download. Yes, download the app, but not data is not needed to browse the app. And it
That's
also comes with audio.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's
so
so
it has also
nice.
yeah, it also has an audio feature, so that migrants who cannot read can listen to the audio.
Mm. Is this app available only for Malaysians or?
It is available worldwide. Even you can download it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So our listeners who are, well, our listeners right now could actually download the app, and anywhere,
anywhere,
whether you're in the ASEAN region or anywhere in the
anywhere.
world, you can use
Yes,
this. Oh, this
yes.
is amazing. Thank you,
Thank
Sumitha,
you.
for telling us about this wonderful app. Other than that, though, you've also mentioned about Makan for Migrants, which is a program that you've started just recently, also during the pandemic. But other than that, also you've shared with us some of the things that you've been doing as well, including pro bono work with migrant workers. Wow. I mean, that's really something. And I'm sure that other than the legal work that you've been doing with them, you've also learned a lot in terms of your personal insights about migrants and their families, and the many issues surrounding um, migrant workers and their plight. Moving to my next question, the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers, and I think you've mentioned this a while ago, it doesn't just talk about migrant workers themselves, but also talks about their families. In your experience in working with migrant workers, how does being away from one's family affect one's well-being? And we'd like to know, especially with this podcast, would like to know how can we help in filling this void caused by being away from the family? Since we've already talked about you representing a lot of migrant workers and also their families, maybe you could share with us some insights on that.
For many migrant workers, coming to Malaysia or even any other destination country would be their first time they had ventured beyond their country borders. For some, it would be even the first time they're leaving their villages. So they're in a totally new place with new people, new language, new lifestyle. And I think that is what is so admiring about the migrant
Mm.
workers, that they can take that bold step to
Yeah.
leave the comfort of their home, right? So unlike expatriates, they are not allowed to bring their families on the migration journey.
Mhm.
In addition, the employment contract that the migrant signs is usually for 3 years. And during this duration, the employers do not allow the migrants to go home. So as
As
a
in
result,
completely,
yes,
completely just staying in the country where they're working.
yes, usually with the first 3 years, the migrant does not go home unless
Mm,
it's a family emergency. So
okay.
as a result, we see many migrants, of course, feel homesick, and they spend a lot of money to stay in touch with their families, because telecommunication, you have WhatsApp and all that, but then you have to top up your phone. And that's not cheap, so they spend a
Yes,
lot of money just,
definitely.
yeah,
Definitely. I mean, data is not even, I mean, mobile
exactly.
data is not cheap.
So
Yes,
in
that's
countries
true.
like
I can relate to
Malaysia,
that.
in
Yes.
countries like Malaysia, you can just go into Starbucks and then buy something and use the
And
free
use the
internet.
Wi-Fi. Ah,
Yeah.
okay. I see. I
but but
see.
in but for migrant workers, they don't do that because the Starbucks is expensive for them, right?
Yeah.
you know
Mm-hmm.
so unfortunately, some migrants don't really cope well, and we do see some of them suffer from depression, alcoholism, and they also contemplate suicide, and some have committed suicide. Just the fear,
Oh.
that sheer loneliness, right? So of course there are a few ways migrants can cope in a foreign land. We always encourage migrants to do activities on their off days. We tell them, do not work on your off days. uh,
Mm-hmm.
Take your off days and go out with your friends, go out with your fellow workers. Instead of being cooped up in the accommodation, go out, venture out together and meet other fellow migrants. This is something that we encourage migrants to do every time. There are also migrant community organizations which brings migrants together. They organize activities like social activities or even capacity building activities. Example, in my office, I have an office in Kuala Lumpur, and a migrant community from Indonesia and Philippines. They use the space in
Mm.
my office to do activities on weekends. And they
Mm.
use the office whenever they wish to do any activities that they want. So because sometimes doing activities outside can be expensive, they may have to pay rental, or sometimes
Oh,
doing it in a
because
public space is
mm.
difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my office is open to migrants to use for their activities. So these are some of the ways that we get migrants to cope. Of course, as example, domestic workers. If you have domestic workers at home, it is good to give your domestic worker her day off, to go out, not for the domestic worker to take her day off but sit in the house. So we
Yes,
encourage
yes.
employers to let your domestic workers go out. So the domestic example, the Filipino domestic workers, they are very active in the church activities. So we meet a lot of domestic workers from Philippines at church, and they go. That's their way of going out and
And
having
socializing and meeting up
exactly
with fellow Filipinos too, right?
right,
I mean
right.
that's a very Filipino trait. I mean, and most of the time, I just remember when people, or at least me, I mean, in our community also, after going to church, you also have some time to catch up with each other, do socializing, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, of course, there's a lot of employers will tell us, "Oh, I take my domestic worker out with me." Yeah,
Mhm.
that is one way. But then I think giving the domestic worker her space to do
Mm.
what she wants and how she wants is extremely important.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely. Yes, how she would want to spend the day, and how she wants to spend this day with people that she wants to spend it with, right?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, that's very nice. So, aside from the activities that you do with with migrant workers and sharing your office, and that's really also very nice. I mean, on a personal note, that's very generous of you and kind of you also to share your office space so that people could have a venue, because it really does, logistics could also be hard. I mean, it would be better if they could just meet up in one place where they would feel also they would feel safe, and at the
Exactly.
same time they don't have to worry about budget or paying for the rent or just using the space.
So my
um
office is in the middle of the city, so
mhm.
it's accessible by train, by public transport, and I found the office just keeping in mind that migrants needed access. So even
Oh
when I went, yeah,
wow,
so when I
yes.
went around looking for an office, it was eye opener as well. I must share this story with you. How I went to offices in the vicinity where I lived,
Mhm.
so it will be easy for migrants to come as well as for me to go to office as well. And these were buildings; these were big buildings that I went to look for in office. But no one wanted to give me a space. Because they said
Mm.
they were quite apprehensive that that my clients were migrants, and they said that
Oh,
it's
so
going to be
that
really
was a
difficult.
consideration. That's a major
Absolutely.
consideration then.
So they didn't want migrants walking into the building. So I said so I just rejected a lot of buildings that I went to, and so I said, okay, if you're not going to allow my clients into the building, then I don't want to have an office in that kind of building as well. So finally we
Oh,
found finally we found this
that's
building,
so nice. Mm-hmm.
because this building is the same building that the Nepal embassy has their office as well. So of
Mm.
course it was already used to having migrants come into the building, so it was not a problem then. Yeah.
Wow, that's so wow. I mean, I'm lost for words. That's amazing. I mean, I like the fact that you really considered the migrants. I mean, just choosing your office, the
You
migrants
don't have
really
to.
played a very big part in even that small detail, and that makes you all the more admirable. So wow, Sumitha, thank you for sharing that experience. Then, um, can you also share with us, aside from your office, the story behind your office, can you also just share with us some inspiring stories on how migrant workers were able to build their lives or careers away from their home countries? I mean, I understand that, yes, you've mentioned a while ago that it really takes a toll on their mental health, especially their mental health, being away from their families. But can you share with us some stories that you can probably remember, about these migrant workers who have overcome that challenge or those challenges?
There are many, actually. There are many. We hear many stories of migrants buying land, building their homes in their home country, getting married, getting their siblings
Oh.
married off. Their children's going to good schools. I mean, their needs are so, it's very much like what we want, isn't it? There are two stories come to mind, actually. A few years ago, we met a Filipino domestic worker. So she worked for this family, and the wife in the family was running an online bakery. So over the years, the Filipino domestic worker became a very good at cake decorating and even baking. So
Wow.
Yeah, so she learned the trade, and after 6 years, 6 to 7 years, she went back to Philippines and opened her own bakery, and she's done really, really
Wow!
well.
That's
So it was, yeah. So I
amazing.
think it was inspiring because
What
she
is
didn't
this
just
bakery? I will try this bakery.
so she didn't just look at her job as a job. She
Mhm.
looked at it as a skills building as well for herself, and I think that was really good. Um, Other types of story, we had an Indian national
Mhm.
who worked in a beauty salon here,
Mhm.
but eventually she was a victim of trafficking. She was
Mhm.
saved, she was rescued, and we sent her home safely. Then later she went on to work in one of the leading beauty salons in one of the metropolitan states in South India. So she's comfortable.
Wow.
Yeah, because her story was a
Wow.
bit difficult because her family was quite not accepting her return for
Mm.
reasons, for some reasons. So she had to leave her hometown again. But she was so scared to migrate to another country. So
Mhm.
we helped her to find a job down south where she could, work. But so she's doing really well as well. She keeps in touch with us. Yeah,
Well, until today. Wow, that's very nice. Oh, I'm very happy that, I mean, of course problems would always arise, but there is hope. There is
there's
hope,
hope.
and your stories are just very inspirational. I mean, from of course it starts out as sad ones, but it turns out to be happy or hopeful also, even inspiring, not just to other migrant workers, but for people in general who are going through a very tough time. You mentioned a while ago that you've helped one of the migrants to come home to his or her. Sorry, I
Her,
mean to
her.
her home country. And I've been reading some articles about you and your organization, and you've mentioned there before that before you try to represent them, you also at least try to get back the passport or the documents of the
Migrant, yes.
migrant worker, because I mean, can you tell us about that?
So
Can
I
you
think
share with us?
if say suppose the migrant is a documented migrant,
Mm-hmm.
the law, the Passport Act actually does not allow the employer to hold the passport of the migrant, but it is an industrious practice here, where the passport is withheld by the employer. So when the migrant leaves the employment, the first thing we do is try to get back the passport, and that comes with either I will try to speak to the employer to get back the passport. If that fails, then I will make a police report to get back the passport.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very, very essential for the migrant worker to get back the passport, not because of anything, so that his repatriation will be regular, in the sense that he does not have to take a special pass or some other travel document to leave the country, because that will prevent the migrant from coming back to Malaysia if he does not go back in the regular way. So this
Mm.
is why I'm
Okay.
very adamant, when the migrant needs to go back, his passport needs it to be in his hand.
Mm. Wow. But after a while, though, I mean, what if, I mean, let's assume, I mean, in that kind of situation, of course the ideal situation would be that the passport or the documents would be returned. But what then happens when the employer doesn't return it, or does not cooperate with you?
This all depends on what the migrant wants. I don't do anything that the migrant doesn't want. So we will ask the migrant, do you want me to get back the passport for you? So it is the migrant's choice. And so if you're not able to get back the passport for whatever reason, we will also give the choice to the migrant whether should pursue, uh,
Mm.
proceed to apply for another travel document for him, or whether we continue to pursue to get back his passport. So the decision lies with the migrant.
Wow, that's so nice. I mean, it gives a sense of empowerment. Sorry, it gives a sense of empowerment to the migrant on what he or she wants to do with his or her life. I mean, the power
Exactly.
is in their hands, not necessarily you. You'll be the one to help them, but you do not make the decisions for them, because it's
Yes.
them who has to make that decision or choice at the end of the day. Wow, that is some very strong form of empowerment, and I very much admire you for that, Sumitha. Thank you for that,
Thank you.
and that's very nice to know. Um, I guess now I want to ask you, what do you think? I mean, considering the work that you've been doing for migrants, not just in Malaysia, but also in the region and around the world, what do you think? And I want to relate this somehow, of course, with ASEAN, because we're doing a podcast for the working group for an ASEAN Human Rights Mechanism. I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, what is the future then of migration in the ASEAN region?
So we can't talk about the future of migration in ASEAN without talking about the pandemic. So the
Okay.
pandemic has changed the landscape of migration.
Definitely, definitely,
Yep.
yes. It has also put people in a situation where they really get stuck. I mean, I have a lot of friends also who in the middle of the pandemic wanted to go home but couldn't because
Yes.
of the restrictions, right? So
Yes.
yeah.
So we saw a lot of closures of companies, downsizing of companies. Then we saw, of course, termination of workers. And then, overtime is also now a big problem. So we see a lot of companies just doing normal working hours. So no overtime, example. So
Yes,
all
yes.
these, all these have affected the migrants' ability to sustain themselves in the country of destination and their families in the country of origin. So we also see a lot of people struggling economically in their home countries, right? The economies in ASEAN have been slow to pick up due to I feel is due to the fact that it's difficult to predict government's responses to new variants, new
Mm.
outbreaks, and the management of the pandemic itself, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
we do see a lot of knee-jerk reaction to how the pandemic is playing out. We foresee, one, the cost of migration to increase due to
Mm.
vaccination requirements, increase in cost of flights, and also quarantine requirements. We foresee cost of business operations would go up as well, as there are requirements for workers to be tested regularly and companies to shoulder that cost, and also to shoulder the cost of sanitization and even quarantines for their workers. So the question would be is how much of these costs will be passed down to the workers? That
Yes.
is the
Or
question.
how will this affect the workers
Yes.
personally?
So many countries like Malaysia, we have kept our borders closed to migrant workers. We have seen
Mm.
many employers here struggling to cope with the lack of labor. We did see undocumented workers being sought for work, but unfortunately, the employers were not able to pay the minimum wage of the country, or even a decent wage to that for that matter. So I suppose you can say, in summary, we will see an increase in migration population because of the struggling economies in sending countries. We'll see an increase in irregular migration,
Irregular
um,
migration.
irregular migration, most probably because of the unavailability of vaccine in country of sending countries, increase in flight costs, quarantine requirements in destination countries. So we will see increase in irregular migration. Of course, like what I mentioned just now, we will see increase in recruitment cost, the flights, quarantine, COVID testing, and all that. And we would definitely have more wage theft because employers are going to be pushing this additional cost to migrants. So this is what we will be seeing.
Okay. But on that note then, I mean, despite that, um what do you think, or is what is the call then? What is the call then for the different states in the ASEAN? I mean, of course, that would be a very that would lead us to a to difficult situations, especially personally for migrant workers. So, if you would have something to advocate for in terms of migrant workers having foreseen these problems, what would you want states to do then?
Right. The pandemic, in fact, has served as an amplifier of migration systems that were broken, discriminatory, and where migration policies were arbitrary and not well thought through. This is what the pandemic amplified. But then again, the pandemic also provided the opportunity to many governments to fix this broken system. So I would definitely urge sending countries to re-look at bilateral agreements and push for better rights for their citizens.
Mm-hmm.
For destination countries, it cannot be business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
Government needs to beef up labor inspection and enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
adopt and ratify key conventions on labor, and most importantly, open dialogues with civil society, trade unions, and migrant community organizations. On a macro level, we need buyers to be to do more comprehensive social auditing and monitoring of
Social
their
auditing. Mm-hmm.
yes, and monitoring of their supply chain. Not knowing where or who is producing your products or complaining about the complexity of the supply chain is not a viable excuses anymore. You need to know
Mm-hmm.
where your products are coming from and whether they're being produced by forced labor. So this is something. These are
Mm-hmm.
some of the uh, you know recommendations I
Things
would
that you
put
have.
forth.
Yes, yes. Well, on that note, then, I guess I just want to ask you, given the current situation and the experiences you've had in the past, relating it to how we are now, and looking forward then to the future, what is your hope for migrant workers and their families all around the world? I mean, we could start off probably first with with migrant workers in Malaysia and maybe in the region, and ultimately for the world.
I have so much hope for the migrants. Honestly, I
Yeah.
do. Um,
And I can feel it. I can really feel it all the way here in the Philippines, which is very nice.
yeah,
It's very nice and moving.
many countries rely on migrant labor.
Mhm.
Malaysia relies heavily on migrant labor, especially in our GDP contributing sectors. Example, plantation, our agricultural. 75% of the plantation sector is migrant workers and the agriculture as well.
Mhm.
And then for country of origins, the migrants' remittances provide a vital source of finance and foreign exchange, right?
Mhm.
So we have to realize that migrant workers' contribution to the nation building be recognized. This is my really my hope. They're
Mhm.
not here to take away our jobs or anything, but they're here to build our nation together, and that is something we must acknowledge
Mhm.
as Malaysians, as also ASEAN as well. Um, my hope is for migrants to be able to live and work with dignity, and that they are respected and appreciated as equal human beings. I think a lot of people look down on migrants as second class citizens, and they are not. They are absolutely not. The food we eat, the buildings we live in, the road we use, all the infrastructure that we have are from the contribution of the migrants and, of course, the citizens as well, but largely from the migrants. And I think they need to be respected for their contribution. That's my hope.
Wow, that's very nice. And um, I mean, can I just say that I like how your responses or your hopes and stories always come back to how we are no different from migrants. I mean, it's very nice because you've already, I mean, because of your stories and the things that you've shared with us, it makes us realize that we are no different from migrants. Our needs, our wants, our hopes, they're all the same. And they should be treated equally too, because they also deserve the same.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, on that note, this has been a very insightful episode of ASEAN People Speak, and I very much appreciate you for the insights and the things that you've shared with us today, Miss Sumitha. Um, are there any last messages, I guess, that you would want our viewers to hear before we end our episode for today?
Um, I think it's just to recognize migrants. Really, just look
Mhm.
around yourself. The domestic workers, the security guards. We're not asking you to look far. The
Mhm.
persons who come and pick up your garbage. All these are migrant workers.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong in being nice to them, to be
Mhm.
respectful to them, to speak respectful to migrants. And I think that's a normal trait that a human being should have. A lot of people complain that migrants are sometimes rough. and I must say that it's because they pick up the language from people who are rough. So that's why
Mm,
they tend to be
okay.
rough, but then they are
Yeah.
not. You
Yes,
know,
yes.
so just be mindful, or be look around you.
Mhm.
Don't treat them like an invisible people, right?
Or a stranger, or a stranger,
Yes.
or someone so different as you.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
thank you,
you.
thank you so much, Sumitha, for everything that you have shared with us tonight, not just your insights, your stories, but your hope as well for migrants, that they be recognized, that we recognize them as equally as important as us citizens, and that they too deserve to enjoy every bit of human right that we all do enjoy, because after all, we're all human beings and we're all created equal.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all for today's episode for ASEAN People Speak. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, Sumitha, for joining me today. Would you like to promote your social media account, your website, organization, or any upcoming projects before we say goodbye?
Just good work app. We just encourage everyone to download the app, and to encourage migrants to download the app as well.
Yes, again, we'd like to plug in the app. The app is called what's the app called again?
Just good
Just
work.
Good Work Malaysia. Oh, I mean
Yeah.
that's for Malaysia, but Just Good Work in general, and it's
Yeah.
available in different countries worldwide. Wow. Okay, thank you for that. Join us again next week. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast on Spotify so you never miss an episode. Also, we encourage all our listeners to subscribe to our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channel at WG ASEAN HR Mech, and to visit our website, ASEANHRMech.org. Again, this has been ASEAN People Speak, and your host, Regine Jessica Abwell, saying good night and thank you and stay safe. Bye.